Welcome to the Group Answers podcast. I'm your host, Brian Daniel. This is the weekly show designed specifically for pastors, disciple makers, group pastors, and small group leaders. Truly, we are created to help anyone with bottom line responsibilities for discipleship. Our goal is simple: to resource, train, and encourage you in the vital work of discipleship. This is the Group Answers podcast. Let's do it. Hey, we are back with another episode of the Group Answers show, and it is just good, Haley Malone, just to have you back. I don't know where you've been. I don't know why you don't accept my text or calls anymore, but I'm glad.
No.
I am glad. I will shame you. Yes.
No,
I
will always answer, Brian, big time Daniel.
Haley, as you know, is the director of groups at First Baptist Church Orlando, and so will on occasion join us to co-host. And we welcome today author Courtney Reissig. So Courtney, it's good to see you. This is the first time you've been with us. So I hope, I just hope it goes okay for you. It can be a little intense sometimes.
No, I'm really glad to be here.
It's going to be fun. Well, with that being said, we want to kick it off. Is that all right?
Yeah, I think so. Let's get going.
So Courtney, I know, as an avid listener of the show that you are aware that one of our heartbeats is the local church and how we are caring for and discipling the local church. And I know that you and your husband, Daniel, have had a lot of involvement in the local church. Could you share with us, what does discipleship look like when you think of it in the local church? And maybe even some discipleship hacks that our listeners who are group leaders or maybe ministers of ed could take home with them after they walk away from this podcast.
Yeah, I think with discipleship in the church, I think to define what it looks like, I think you have to define the end goal. So thankfully, the Bible defines the end goal for us. And so when Jesus gives the Great Commission, it's go, therefore, make disciples of all nations. And so he tells us to disciple others. And then we see him as the model. And the model for discipleship is him teaching and training them in his word. And so I think there's a lot of things that we call discipleship that are maybe spiritual encouragement or things like that. But I think at the end of the day, our discipleship model is the path of Christ, which is to teach people in his word and to teach people to be biblically and theologically literate so that they can therefore go out and make disciples. And disciples are anyone who's a mini Christ, who bear his image and who live out what it means to be his followers. And the only way that we can do that is if we know our Bibles. And so I love group ministry and small group ministry and things like that. But I think that an overemphasis on a small group ministry, that is focused maybe solely on like discussion-based things and not as much on a literacy piece can fail to do that. I think we need to gather together for community for sure, but I don't think community is the end goal of discipleship. I think biblical literacy is the end goal of discipleship. So the ways I've seen it done well are when that is clear in the mission statement of what it means to be in a group. And what it means to be, well, you can call it minister of education. You can call it this. Sometimes those can be used interchangeably, though. I think that's where it's hard. You have to define your term. So sometimes a group's minister is really a small group's minister, and that's fine. That has a specific purpose. But when I'm talking about education in the church, I'm a high school English teacher, so I'm talking about the same way I'm talking about education in my classroom, which is, do they know the standards that I'm teaching them?
Yes.
So that's kind of where I would see the end goal.
Yeah. Do you see that right now in your local church or in the churches that you've been able to spend time with, just this like hunger for more biblical literacy and more theology and more resources, more conversations around that? I am here in Orlando, especially in our young adults. Yeah.
So I would say I have seen a hunger for things that I have not seen the practices shift. So, and that is where I think churches can really be in a bind, because when there's hunger and then there's not a change in practice in your discipleship model, then people will go and look for that somewhere else. and you're still accountable to those people. And if you're failing to give them what in their hearts they know they need, then that's on you. So I have seen a shift in a desire for sure.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing. And I think some of that is because we're pendulum swingers.
Mm-hmm.
So like we do one model of ministry. So I used to be over groups in our church, and over all the curriculum for a Southern Baptist church as well. And so there's probably like 45 group leaders, and I was over their curriculum development, and I was over training them to teach the curriculum. And so when we were an anomaly because very few churches did Sunday school anymore, and we still did.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of the thing that we had going for us, is we didn't change. We never stopped doing Sunday school.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting to see the other churches in our city and how they had shifted over time. And one church in particular built a building, because they were a church plant. They built a building for their 700 people without any classroom space except for kids. And so now they want to implement some version of a discipleship, a theological literacy model, and they don't have space for it because they were building their church in that time period. And so I think it's interesting. I see a shift, but I don't know if that's because we are always I mean, you see it in education too. We're always saying that what someone did previously wasn't good enough and we got to change it. And then really we're like, oh, maybe this is how we should have done it all along. Because I remember I worked with someone who had been doing this for a really long time. And he gave me a lot of old, it's not even Lifeway, it was a Sunday school board stuff, books that probably were written in the 50s and 60s. Wow. And I read those books and I was like, oh my gosh, this is Deep Discipleship by J.T. English. But it was written, it was not that it was not plagiarized, but it was just like the concepts. And I was like, oh, we stopped this for a little bit and now we're going back to it. And I think what we see bear out in the lives of God's people is a hunger for something they know they need, but the fruit of years of not being theologically and biblically trained is bearing bitter fruit in the lives of our people. And so I think, yeah, I've seen a shift. I don't know if everyone's caught up to it. The church that we're at now does not have a robust plan for theological and biblical discipleship. Our women's ministry does it pretty good, but that's almost always the case, that the women do it better first. Mm-hmm. No offense to you, Brian.
Well, first of all, if I think just the term pendulum swingers belongs on a t-shirt somewhere. I've never heard that before. We are pendulum swingers that's just a great statement.
Yeah.
And then second, one of the things that we're seeing in men's ministry is there's a book that I've read recently, and this author uses the term the outsiders. And so it's the outsiders like Andrew Peterson and like Joe Rogan that are willing to engage the questions that men are really asking.
Mm-hmm.
So to what extent then is the church willing to go and ask those same questions for the sake of not abdicating what you're describing to these outsiders who really don't have the gospel in mind? Right. So I think that's something, but what I would want to ask you guys is, and this would be a question for both you guys as leaders, this, Courtney, that you pointed out, this tension between literacy and community. I think most groups are trying to do both. But Haley, in your leadership context, how well are groups doing that? It seems to me, my experience is you kind of fall on one side of that fence or the other.
Yep.
And you lip service the one that is the more anemic.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's our responsibility as leaders, and there's training that goes into this, to be sure that you are fanning both. But to Courtney's point, if you have to err on one side, it seems like to me you fall on the side of literacy.
Mm-hmm.
But I would just Haley, how real is this tension in your context? How hard is it to do both, to really coach group leaders up and doing both? Is that something that keeps you up at night?
Oh, for sure. Because our church's pure size, demographics, and all of that, with their upbringing, de-churched, unchurched, multi-generation families that are at our church, there's such a wide variety that the first step for them to even identify themselves as a member of our group, or a member of our church rather, is to at least try to get them into a group and to just find community. That's the first step. But then once they've established a connection to the church and they trust the church, we've got an elevated level of training and development in theology. So we have it set up that way because people come to Orlando and live here and don't ever tell us who they are. So their first step isn't going to be to go to this deep theological 12-week class. Fair. They're going to take a step to a small group where they meet somebody that they trust. And now those two together are going to go to something that we offer.
I think that is probably a better model, because then you're not asking your groups to do too much. Because also because I think we ran into that in the church I was serving at, where we were asking our groups to do too much. And so you were always erring on the side of one or the other. And it's kind of like the old school Southern Baptist model was you had a director and a teacher, and the director was kind of like your social person. And then your teacher was like your person who taught. And that works well, but that requires a significant amount of training to get people to that level. But what I like about what you're talking about, Haley, is that you are getting people in where their felt need is, and then you are getting them to a pathway towards growth. Yeah. Which, I mean, really, like, and then you can also cycle classes through, like do like an institute type thing where you're cycling classes through, and then there's a pathway for them. So then they can then be trained to start a new group or, and so I think we ran into that problem where our groups were only teaching oriented, but we were never graduating them to something else. And I think that's sometimes the problem. You see this in women's ministry a lot, where you do women's Bible study for your entire life and you don't graduate to something else. And I do think we are always supposed to be growing, but the end goal of women's Bible study is not, I'm going to study the Bible with my friends. It's, I'm going to go do Bible study so I have the tools to do this on my own so that I can be a self-feeder, so that I can walk in obedience to Christ. And I think when you only have those models like that, when you don't have the two models like you're talking about, I think there's nothing for them to graduate to. Right. No one should expect to be in, I mean, you could go to Bible study, obviously, you want people to keep going, but we want them to be learning something more than just, I have this scaffolded study that does all the work for me, and I never learned the tools to do it on my own.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
I don't know. I read it. It was one of the books I read. I don't remember who it was, which maybe that means I can just take credit for it. But the term was, we never graduate from the gospel, Courtney, to your point. I just love that phrase.
It's great.
So Someone to Believe, the Bible study by Courtney Reissig, is now available anywhere that you buy Bible study. So congratulations to that and getting that out. That is no small feat. So I was looking at the press kit for that, Courtney, and there's a passage in there that reads that Someone to Believe points readers to the stabilizing power of Jesus in times of change and disillusionment. And I mean, who doesn't want to sign up for that? I mean, this is my question for you, and it's, I'm just double clicking on the terms change and disillusionment. Now, change is one of those things I think most people would say, well, everybody goes through change. But when you were working out this thesis and you were, developing this content, I'm just curious as to how you were approaching those two terms. Are these in the parlance of our lives? Are these things that we can all just expect? Are these the things like lowercase c and lowercase d? Or when you developed this content, did you have in mind, these are the exceptions? These are big change. This is big disillusionment. I was just wondering how you took on this topic as you were developing this Bible study.
Yeah. So when I was working on the book, each chapter deals with a different part of the Gospel of John. And so sometimes it's big C, or big D, disillusionment. And sometimes it's like maybe lowercase c, lowercase d. So like in the chapter on Jesus as the Good Shepherd, I talk a lot about shepherds that fail us. And so that would be, I think, big D, disillusionment. I think it's a big struggle when religious leaders fail us and they're not who we expected them to be or who the Bible says they should be. So I speak to that, but then I also speak to some like lower level disillusionment. Like my life, I'm maybe ashamed of like my past, and like I feel like the Lord can't accept me. I mean, that feels really big, but people don't always walk away from him for that. Mm-hmm. I think I spoke to also, I know I spoke to those who feel like they are good enough, like that their religious credentials are enough. That is one I was really struck by in reading The Great Dechurching about the people who walked away. I thought when I read that book that they were going to do this whole expose on the people who were disillusioned with the church. And what they found in the book is that it's the, what they call it, casual dechurching, like the people who, and I think there is I've always been a Christian type of casual dechurching that is not this major cataclysmic event that leads you to walk away. It's just kind of like, oh, well, I was bored. I moved on. But you maybe on the outside look like a believer. You look like you have all the religious credentials.
Right.
So I wanted to speak to those things, but I mainly wanted the structure of John to speak to whatever came up out of it. And so John's main point in writing the Gospel of John is belief. So he says at the end of John, these things are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, and by believing have life in his name. And so he wants his readers and listeners, those who are orally hearing it, to see all the ways Jesus was, all the things he did, all the signs that he worked in the Gospel of John, and to believe in him. And there were a variety of things that Jesus did, and those are the specific things that John wanted to point to for belief. And so whatever hindrance we have to belief, the things that John wants us to look at and find him believable.
So things like change and disillusionment in this world, this broken world, are to a large degree unavoidable.
Right.
But the clarion call of the Gospel of John is belief cuts through those things and really overpowers those things. And that's John's. Yeah. Okay. That's good.
And what's interesting, and this is what I love about the Gospel of John, is John is the last writer, the oldest disciple, the oldest apostle. He's the last one to die, and he's the last gospel written. And many believe that when John was writing the Gospel of John, I mean, it was way at the end of his life. And when he writes things like about Jesus' prediction of Peter's death at the end of the gospel, Peter's already dead by the time he even writes about it. And so John has seen, I write about this at the end of the book, John has seen so many things all along the way. And yet here he is saying, but he's still someone for us to believe in. And he's calling us and his readers back in that time period to look at Jesus and believe despite, and I think of like, it's comforting because I'm not as old as John was when he wrote it. I didn't live that long. I didn't watch all my friends die, and I didn't watch severe persecution happen. I didn't watch all those things. I haven't, but John's a model for us in belief. And I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, that's good. I want to take that into the next question, because not all of our listeners might know your story, Courtney, and what you've walked through, and moments or seasons of darkness. But I would believe that most people listening have experienced something like that in their life, where they've walked through or are currently walking through a season of darkness, or are shepherding a person in their group who's walking through a season of darkness. So talk to us a little bit about that, just what you did and what maybe even your own belief helped carry you through those seasons, and some tips or practical things that you could point our people to.
Yeah. So I started working on this. I started working on this proposal probably 5 years ago. And a lot of it was because I'd led a Bible study through the Gospel of John at the church we were at. We'd helped plant, and we ended up leaving that church and moving on. And the church doesn't exist anymore in its iteration as a plant. But that was a hard season. And I remember spending time in the Gospel of John and thinking, I'd lost all my community. I'd lost what I thought I knew. I thought we moved here, all those things. And Lord led us to a different church, which is the church that I was on staff at. And we walked through some things there with really public disillusionment because of really public situation that happened there. And again, I was reminded, and I spent more time in the Gospel of John than finished this book. But what I have sent, particularly the one about the Good Shepherd, I have sent far too many texts to people in a season of disillusionment because a shepherd or a leader hurt them or disappointed them, of reminding them that Jesus is the Good Shepherd. And what I love about that passage is that it's coming on the heels of the man born blind being kicked out of the temple for being healed by Jesus. Like he was blind, now he sees, and everyone is like, well, Jesus is crazy, so we're going to kick you out because you align yourself with him. And Jesus finds him and says, I am the Good Shepherd. And I've sent so many texts to people saying, all the other shepherds, they're wolves, they'll disappoint you, but there's one who will find you who is the Good Shepherd. And that, for me, of any other thing in the Gospel of John, has comforted me the most, largely because I believe it's Peter who writes about it at the end of 1 Peter, where he talks about when the chief shepherd appears, we shall all be like him. And I'm reminded again and again that there's a lot of things that disappoint us. It doesn't have to be religious leaders. It can be parents or friends or a whole host of things. But there's an acute disappointment that comes when someone who you're supposed to trust betrays that trust.
Right.
That we need a strong anchor to stand on, that they are not a representative of him.
Right.
They're not a representative of the Good Shepherd. They are the opposite of that. And he does not change no matter what is being thrown at us. And sometimes we need to be reminded of that multiple times a day.
Right.
Over and over and over again. And we're so forgetful. And it's so easy to be in the middle of a situation and think that he's forgotten us. And so that's also where the Psalms are really helpful, because the Psalms are filled with disappointment.
Right.
So much disappointment.
Right.
And yet again, the prevailing theme is, I am looking to the one who does not change.
Yes.
That is what we look to, because all of this stuff here is completely disillusioning. And I don't want to pretend that we're in a worse situation now than we've ever been as Christians. I don't necessarily know if we are. But I know it's hard. So, yeah.
Courtney, is there a counsel for leaders in that message? Like, if you start to feel too much the center of things, is that not maybe an indicator that you have drifted to some degree? I'm just wondering, as you know, to spin it around. I mean, we're talking about disillusionment, like disappointment that I may have because of someone in my life, but what about the leaders that are listening? I mean, what are the signs that we ought to be looking out for so that we don't fall into being the one who disillusions?
Right. Oh, yeah. And I think definitely, like you were saying, is like if we're the one who is the center. I think too, like one thing I had to fight for a lot when I was on staff, and I mean, I think it's probably in my disposition because I had to fight it as a teacher too, is the lack of boundaries that I might have, of not being able to be like, someone else can do that.
Right.
I am not their savior. Like, I cannot save people. God can save people. I cannot save people. And so to be able to release that good desire to help and to serve, and to say, I can let that go and not be the center of that right now. I can let that go and rest. I can let that go and not feel like I have to answer every email or every call or everything. I set my own boundaries.
Right.
So I remember being in counseling one time, and I was talking to him, and he was telling me about this book I needed to read on maybe you should read this book on boundaries. And I remember thinking, I don't really have boundary issues, but I'll read it. And he was like a good counselor, so he was like casual about it. And then I thought I had boundary issues and like this other, and I was reading it and I was like, oh my gosh, I have so many boundary issues. And I think that is, I don't think leaders set out to hurt people. I don't think they do. I think somewhere along the way, they became ultimate. And then they couldn't let that power go.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a cautionary tale to all of us because we are so susceptible to wanting to be the master of our own universe and the master of everyone else's universe and to be their savior. And I think we are probably better served when we have better boundaries that let somebody else be the hero and not us all the time.
Yeah, one of the things I've noticed about the world is that every indication leads you to believe that you are the center of a universe. I mean, just about every conclusion you form is from your own point of view. But the gospel is the opposite of that. The gospel asks you to completely remove yourself from the center of the universe and the center of everything. And I think as leaders, that's a tricky balance.
Yep.
Because there's accountability and responsibility that are real, but I think they need to be put in their proper place. But sometimes we can drift into where they are not in their proper place, and that's where you can get on, not to overstate it, a less than healthy path, which doesn't always lead to like this blast zone. Sometimes it's a smaller case study, but I think it's all the same. So I think that's really helpful to those that might be listening out there. I don't know that there are things that we don't intuitively know. Sometimes it's just good to hear it again, and be reminded of those things.
On the topic of things that, can cause us to drift and can cause us to go in directions that we don't want to, talk to us about deconstruction. I think that's a topic that a lot of people are hearing, a lot of people are curious about. How does deconstruction work itself into this broken world that we live in? And what would you say to people that are deconstructing their faith or hear that word in their groups of someone saying they're deconstructing their faith? Let me
just append to that. Why don't you just start by telling us, how do you understand that word?
That's great.
And is there, I'm going to say this, I may regret it, but is there a healthy deconstruction and an unhealthy deconstruction?
That's where I was going to go with it.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
let's do it.
I was going to define it and then say there is a healthy one. I think it depends on what you're deconstructing. And are you breaking something down in order to rebuild? Or are you deconstructing things that are not biblical? So I think there is an element of deconstruction that is healthy when you are assessing what beliefs you have held for your entire life, maybe.
Right.
And then you're saying, as I read the scriptures, this is unbiblical or this is not nuanced enough. And I think there's a healthy deconstruction. I think there are so many camps that people have held so tightly to that I'm in this camp and I can't move. And I think the danger right now is what has happened over time is that people feel disillusioned with their camp and they think it's a disillusionment with the church. And then they think it's a disillusionment with the Lord. And so they deconstruct all of those things because there's always someone ready to help you deconstruct it all. And I think when we are afraid of that word, because it's just a word. It's not it's not there's no moral definition given to it. I think if we're deconstructing what needs to go away, I think that's healthy.
Yeah.
I think, we get into danger. So I would say if you're looking at some camps that you like, I have to be in this camp, or I have to believe these things, and you've come to terms with the Bible doesn't say that, and you break things down in order to rebuild something healthier. I think that's good. I think that shows that you're taking biblical literacy seriously because you're owning it for yourself, and I think that's healthy. But I think this happens a lot with a lot of things where Christians don't feel like it's a safe space for them to process their questions about anything, whether it's anxiety and depression or deconstruction or same-sex attraction, any one of those things.
Right.
And then there's always someone in the world who's ready to answer those questions for you and provide you with a path and provide you with community. And you find that, and then you're easily able to just move on over into that camp. And so I think we can really, as a church, be a safe space for people's questions and their doubts and their confusion and their deconstruction, and then help them rebuild something better.
Right.
I think that's what I would say, which I don't use the word deconstruction in the book in a positive or negative way. So but I do think you can speak of it positively.
So if I'm a group leader or discipleship pastor and someone comes to me with something along these lines, I think the counsel here is don't run from that and don't overreact it. But I think an acceptable reaction to that is something along the lines of, so tell me what you mean by that.
Exactly.
And then go from there.
Yes, exactly. Which you always should. I mean, when people come, I have interactions with, this happens with high school students. I'll have interactions with high school students who come to me with really mad about something. Like they're mad at me about something. And if I react to them, instead of figuring out maybe they're mad about something else and they're just taking it all out on me and I need to figure out the root cause of this problem here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we can react to deconstruction or doubt or any of those things, and we can do more harm than we even realize we're doing if we just, instead of asking questions like, tell me about how you're feeling right now. Tell me about why you feel that way. Tell me about what that means to you. I think we can point them actually to a savior who can handle their questions, who can handle their doubts. I mean, Nicodemus came to Jesus at night because he was afraid to ask his questions in the broad. He had fear of man, but still, like, people can come with their questions.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, doubting Thomas in Gospel of John, like, he comes with his questions.
So this is, so I think I can speak for Courtney here as a fellow English major. Deconstruction is not new to us. I was talking about deconstruction. Well, I was hearing about deconstruction, to be honest, in the 90s when I was in graduate school. All right, we got time for one more. I know we're going over a little bit. Just call it bonus content.
Okay.
We talked about someone to believe in, now available. Really excited about that. Again, congratulations. But I'm also really interested in the thesis of teach me to feel, because I think that's something not categorically the same as deconstruction, but I think there's also a shut down the heart movement, that the person that can shut down their heart the greatest is the best disciple. It's something about emotions that we just don't trust.
Right.
And I feel like teach me to feel, the thesis of teach me to feel is just really interesting. I think too often, we shut down the emotions because the obvious downside, when there's also an obvious upside. And you and I talked earlier about Cry of the Soul by Tremper Longman and Dan Allender, which if you haven't read that out there, I would definitely recommend it. But just what is the general direction of Teach Me to Feel, and how can this be how can we apply that, Courtney?
Yeah, so in Teach Me to Feel, I go through, can't remember, 25 Psalms. It's been like 5 years since I wrote it, 6 years since I wrote it, where I show how the Psalms give us language of how to process our emotions. And so the Psalms have always been God's people's prayer book back to him. And when I studied the Psalms, I came to see how, and I was not the only one who saw this, plenty of Psalm scholars see this, that the Psalms really show us that God can handle our emotions and our feelings, and that God wants us to come to him. And so I go through many different feelings that you might feel and show how each psalm speaks to that feeling and gives us language for taking that feeling back to the Lord. And God is not surprised. I think sometimes we want to suppress the heart or suppress our feelings, but he sees all things. So we should just be honest with him.
Right.
And so we might as well just pour out our soul to him. And so there's so much sorrow and darkness in the Psalms that I feel like the Lord is giving us a mercy and a kindness of a way to pray back to him and use his words in our deepest moments of pain and suffering. And Jesus prayed the Psalms. Mm-hmm. Jesus used the Psalms in his greatest moment of weakness and sorrow. How much more can we use the Psalms in the same way?
Well, thanks for that unpacking. And, I would recommend both of these titles to everyone. I think for group leaders, it's just really helpful. Again, it's just a lot of times it's so helpful to put some fresh language and fresh voices to things that we're not unfamiliar with. But thank you, Courtney.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Haley. And again, Someone to Believe In, available now. So that's going to wrap it up for this episode of the Group Answers Show. I'd like to thank producers Angie Elkins and Nikki Ogden, and engineer Donnie Gordon, and co-hosts. And it is so good to see you again, Haley. And for Courtney Reissig, thanks for taking time out of your schedule to be with us and to share with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Group Answers is a production of the Lifeway Podcast Network. Executive producer Angie Elkins, edited by Colin Cruz, and engineered by Donnie Gordon. Produced by Nikki Ogden. And I'm your host, Brian Daniel. Group Answers is recorded at the Lifeway Podcast Studios in Brentwood, Tennessee, and in my personal studio in Evergreen, Colorado, with the help of Riverside.fm. On behalf of the Group Answers team, thank you for listening. I will meet you right back here next week with another episode of Group Answers.